Hello, and welcome back. We've been ranking all of the Marvel movies pre-Endgame from worst to best, and now we get to the top 10. For me, the number 10 movie in the MCU is Captain Marvel.
Okay. Okay, for me, it is Captain America Civil War.
Okay, why don't you talk about Civil War?
Okay, Civil War. Very good movie. Very interesting. It has a very new dynamic of pitting people against each other, the whole Civil War idea. And I thought that was very well done. I do have to say, well, there are two things, I guess, that I, looking back on it, don't like as much. One, the explanation of why whoever is on which side. I don't feel like they developed that well enough. It was just okay, you got Tony and you've got Steve, and everybody just kind of picks sides. And,
Can you elaborate on that?
well,
Who specifically are you talking about?
I don't know that I can give specifics, but it's anyone. It's Black Widow, okay? It's Rhodey. It's why do they pick, and is there a good explanation for why they do, or is it just kind of a one-off statement that they give? It's, well, what about this? Okay, I'm on Tony's side.
Okay, I can see that.
Then the other thing is we've developed a love for these characters for so long, and then you pit them against each other. And I understand that's the whole point, but for me, it was always difficult to see my favorite characters fighting each other, and then really to have nothing come from it because they're all back together fighting for the same cause. And I know it's taken a while, but still, that was a difficulty for me with the movie. But very good, very entertaining every time I've watched it, and strong plot line, just really good.
Okay, I agree about all those points, but I will talk about the movie later
Right?
when I have it ranked. Captain Marvel, I have it number 10. I was honestly surprised. Maybe not since the first Thor movie was I so surprised at what a character did in their debut movie. Because I know the character from the comics, but I had no idea how they would translate that to film. But I think they did it in an excellent way. Setting it as a period piece works, I think, for the character and for the timeline of it all. People complained before about, well, how does Fury know to even make the Avengers since they hadn't met aliens until the Avengers movie? Well, he had, so shut up. And Carol Danvers, I liked as a character a lot. I thought she did a good job, even though she didn't know who she was for most of the film. I think they handled that in an interesting way. I mean, Wolverine has had that memory loss issue for years, but she actually got some resolution in that, and so I think that helps. And then at the end of the movie, whenever she's not handicapped anymore, and she gets full powered up and just starts flying through Kree ships like it's butter, that is a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I can't wait to see her in more movies as well. I thought I was really glad that like Coulson was in the movie and Ronan and these other characters that have been in other movies, but maybe haven't gotten their due. Although unfortunately, this movie contributed to that, I think, because any of those side characters that they brought back were not well utilized, in my opinion. Personally, I don't know why Ronan was there. He barely did anything. I'm glad he was there. I just wish they had better utilized him. And so I guess that maybe is mostly why it's only a number 10. But it's still in the top 10 for me, which is very impressive for a movie that is so new in the MCU.
Right. And it is the most recent one for us to have seen. So it, at least from first glance, it appears to be absolutely solid. Have to go back and watch it several more times, but I do agree with your comment on the people that were brought back. Coulson, I think it was okay that they didn't overutilize him because it wasn't really about him. But I think he served a good role in it. You're just kind of introduced to him because this is a prequel, and this is really the only prequel we have. So to see him in that role, it's good. But you get to see him before you have seen him, and it makes a lot of sense that way. Same thing with Fury, of course. Ronan, I don't know why he was there. Yeah, they could have had anybody stand in for that, and it wouldn't have mattered. So that was not the best tie-in.
I will take umbrage with that being the only prequel, but we'll get to that later.
Okay.
And another thing, the post-credit scene for Captain Marvel was phenomenal. One of the best in a long time because it was just enough about Endgame and had like 4 characters in it, which is, outlandish for a post-credit scene. But it gave us just enough, and I left the movie thinking I really want to see that right now. But I will say I think they should have swapped the post-credit scene. It's a small thing, but I would have had the comedic one first, and then have the meaty one after the entirety of the credits. They did the same thing with Ant-Man and the Wasp too, because after their quote-unquote theatrical credits, they had the scene where he goes into the quantum realm and everyone it gets dusted.
Right.
And then the one at the very end is an ant playing the drums. I would totally swap the comedic and meaty post-credit scenes, but that's a whole other issue. So, you talked about your number 10, right?
Yes, thank you for remembering. That would be Captain America Civil War.
Yeah. Okay, so number 9,
Yep.
I have Iron Man 2.
Okay. And I have Spider-Man Homecoming.
Okay.
Okay.
What some people would call Iron Man 4.
It was Tony heavy, but I still thought it was well done enough that
No, I know.
It was a Spider-Man movie.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But okay, some people will be very upset that I have Iron Man 2 this high. But let me see if I can explain. Like my friend here, I have seen Iron Man 2 many, many times. And maybe it's just overexposure therapy sort of thing, but I find the movie to be delightful. And sure, it's not a perfect movie by any means, but and I have to disagree. You said Iron Man 2 stands alone a bit, but the biggest complaint most people have about the movie is that it's too overstuffed with things from other movies, like Shield being so heavy in the movie. But that's not a problem for me. I mean, like you said, we get introduced to Black Widow in this movie, and she's been in like at least 5 or 6 other MCU films and been very important for the rest of the time. And she's supposed to get her own movie coming up in the next phase at some point. But it's got Justin Hammer in it, who I think is another one of the best one-off villains. And the thing about Justin Hammer is he didn't die. Most one-off villains die, like Whiplash did in this movie. But Justin Hammer just got arrested, so he could come back, and I don't know why he hasn't, other than the fact that Sam Rockwell is kind of busy, I guess. But he was such a weirdo, and he's a great villain against Tony's, brash personality. But I really enjoyed the new Rhodey in this movie. We'll get to that later, I guess, but I like Don Cheadle's Rhodey a lot. I thought the relationship between Tony and Pepper was well handled in this movie, after being not ignored in the first one, but maybe downplayed a little bit. They really went from being employer-employee relationship to actual, boyfriend-girlfriend type relationship. And the action in this movie, most people that hate this movie even have to agree that the Monaco racetrack scene is fantastic, where he's fighting Whiplash in the Mark V armor. I mean, it's great. And also pretty hilarious in that scene if you watch it. But the end of the movie as well, I absolutely love, where Rhodey's suit is taken over and there's all those hammer drones and he has to fight them all. And then when he and Rhodey fight the hammer drones together in that circle place, that is amazing to me. That is 100% Marvel, why I signed up for it, why these movies have continued on to this day. And then after that, not even as a post-credit scene, but Fury outright talks to Tony about the Avengers initiative. What was just a post-credit scene in the first Iron Man movie is now actual plot details in this feature film. So to me, Iron Man 2 doesn't get the respect it deserves, I think. And, it should be... I won't say that you need to put it higher on your list, but just respect that I have it high on mine.
Are you going to step off of your Stark Industries soapbox now?
No, because
okay,
the post-credit scene for Iron Man 2 is also, I think, one of the best handled in the series. Even if it is just shots pulled from another movie, where Coulson rolls up and says, "We found it," and then it pans down to Mjolnir. and the thunder sound hits and it goes to black, that's a beautiful post-credit scene. Even
Very
if people
well executed.
didn't know what Thor was at the time.
Mm-hmm. Very well done. I'll defend myself briefly on that just by saying that even though there's a lot of tie-ins, it's the first time you see Black Widow. It's really the first time you see Shield. It's not reliant on the other movies, but it is tied in heavily. All right. Was that number 9?
Yes.
Which I've not even talked about, have I? Spider-Man Homecoming? Spider-Man Homecoming. Thank you for not being any kind of goblin. Everybody is very thankful that we don't have to see the Green Goblin yet again in another origin story. That would be the other part that I'm thankful for. It's not an origin, which is fantastic because we've had 2 really not well done origin stories, which fortunately we don't have to rank those because they're not on this list. But we don't have to deal with the origin, and we don't have to deal with the Green Goblin. It makes it a much more tasteful Spider-Man movie. I think it's done well as far as the setting goes. It feels like he's in high school. A lot of the other ones, it really has not felt like that. It feels like there's a 25-year-old that just so happens to be still in high school.
Or a 30-year-old.
Or a 30-year-old. So it's been a lot better because of that. And the humor is good for the most part. He has a good relationship with Stark. I think it's interesting to watch those two go back and forth as far as Tony trying to take care of him but also let him do his own thing, and then Peter wanting to be more than just the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, which he's already getting to do some and will do even more so, assuming that he maybe lives past Endgame.
I can't disagree with you at all because I haven't even talked about that movie yet. So obviously, I agree with every positive thing you've said.
Mm-hmm.
We'll move on to number 8.
All right.
At which I have Iron Man, the first one.
Okay. And at number 8, and some people would disagree with this, but again, these are all top 10, is Avengers Infinity War.
Yeah, I mean, top 10 is pretty hard. Both of these movies are ones that most people, though, would put in their top 5 or top 3, or even say are the best.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have our work cut out for us here defending why they are, quote-unquote, so low, even though, as we said, they're still top 10. To me, the first Iron Man movie, it's a standalone, obviously, because there was nothing else yet. It was the first. Jon Favreau, director, nailed the tone of this movie. He nailed the comedy in this movie. Robert Downey Jr. was great, even though his haircut's weird now in that first one. I mentioned before about the relationship with Pepper, and it is established in this movie, but it's not as progressed, and that's not to hold against this movie in any way, because it's a believable progression, and so they have to start here. But one of the drawbacks, as I said earlier, I don't like Terrence Howard as Rhodey as much. He doesn't, present a military man to me like Don Cheadle does, necessarily. But you're introduced to Agent Coulson in this movie, and the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, which later becomes S.H.I.E.L.D. He has a pretty good villain in Obadiah Stane, who starts out as his friend and co-worker, and, father was his friend too, and everything. And then, I've talked about the believable progression of the relationship, but the best progression in this movie is the Iron Man suit itself. They spend the time, they put in the work on how to make the Iron Man suit believably come to life. He doesn't just build it right out the cave. I mean, he has trouble even flying, and, all of his drones and everything. But the end of the movie is a little lackluster. Ironmonger is a little... He just comes out of nowhere and then goes just as quickly. People remember Obadiah Stane. They don't remember Ironmonger.
Yeah.
And other things like that. And there's weird, cultural references in the movie that don't hold up anymore. Like in the first scene, he talks about someone's MySpace page, which, was an outdated movie or an outdated reference when the movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's not huge, but little things like that, and just the overall lackluster end of the movie, I think is why it's not a little bit higher for me personally.
Okay. Again, still at number 8, so still a great movie.
Absolutely.
I will say, as far as the suits go, they do spend their time explaining it, and I guess that they felt like that was good enough because that's the only time they explain how he built so many suits, how he developed nanotech in
Well,
his suits, how he got all of these advancements after the first one.
I mean, you
Or
saw
second one.
you saw the progression of the first one, so you know how it goes. So you just assume that all of that effort went into each individual suit from that point on. They don't have to do it again, otherwise it'd be boring.
Okay. So, number 8 for me is, again, Avengers Infinity War, which is a great movie.
Yes.
Absolutely great movie.
Hands down.
Maybe part of the reason for me not ranking it top 5, top 3, wherever you want to put it, is that and I know it was intended, but when I left the theater, it was different, of course, because you leave the theater and it's not, wow, that was a really great Marvel movie. It was, oh, did I just go to a funeral? What happened? This is thoroughly depressing. And you know it's going to be resolved somehow, but at the time you just think, well, that's really bad. They just killed off, let me count up, half of my favorite characters. Well, that's pretty rough. Otherwise, though, very good film, and the action in it, fantastic. I don't know of maybe any better action in the MCU than some that takes place in that movie. And I imagine it might be even better in Endgame. So I'm excited for that, of course. But Avengers Infinity War, very good, very well put together. I think it's a nice wrap up to Endgame. I think it tied everything up very well to prepare you for what's about to come.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, most people think Infinity War was the culmination of the 10 years, like they say, but really it is Endgame that is the full culmination of the MCU to this point. So, for number 7, I have Spider-Man Homecoming.
Okay. For number 7, I have Captain America Winter Soldier.
Okay. I'll talk about Homecoming because you did as well. I really love that movie too. It's Michael Keaton is a fantastic villain in The Vulture. He is very believable in what he's doing and also very menacing. I love the respect that he and Peter have for each other outside of the suits. And, Tom Holland is a fantastic Peter Parker. And you said it's not an origin story, which I agree with. It is not an origin of how he got his powers, but it is kind of an origin of him becoming Spider-Man.
Right.
Because he comes into his own in this movie. It feels very much like an 80s coming-of-age movie, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off or something, which is, funnily enough, they reference in the movie. But the comedy is just hilarious in this movie. Like, Zendaya, anything she says is hilarious in the movie as MJ. But to me, like, what comes to mind specifically right now is that moment where Peter's trying to chase the arms dealers, and then he, puts out a bunch of webbing, and then it cuts, and he's in an open field, and it just shoots out for like several yards and falls, and he just has to start sprinting across the field because there's nothing to swing from. Like, you don't think about that because Spider-Man lives in New York City where tall buildings are around all the time. And just little things like that. And you said, like, the Tony relationship is good. Even his relationship with Happy in this movie. Jon Favreau comes in as an actor. He's not the director of this movie. They're just like, hey, you want to be happy in a movie? He's like, sure. Because he's a team player. He's great. But, Spider-Man Homecoming, I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm looking forward to Far From Home. If they do half as much of what this movie did right, then it'll be a great movie too.
Absolutely. And it is very good. Okay. Captain America, Winter Soldier. Captain America, as a trilogy, is maybe to me one of the least connected trilogies, aside from having Captain America, because every movie is very different. And especially when you get to Civil War, which we already talked about, it's really not a Captain America movie. I mean, he is in the movie, but it's almost an Avengers movie, just on two different sides. But with Winter Soldier, it's a good Captain America movie, but I also think it's the best Black Widow movie that we have. I think that she does a really excellent job throughout. Develops her character a lot more, and then of course you have Bucky, and I always love getting to see his relationship with Steve, and we get to see a lot of that in this. And the movie doesn't really resolve fully, but it gives you enough to be hopeful about their relationship, about how everything's going to turn out. Action's very good. All of the helicarrier, everything with that, very, very neat. The danger, though, the imminent threat, I don't know. That does seem a little weird that they're just going to use the helicarriers.
You think you won't die from a helicarrier?
No, I think I would absolutely bite it if there were a helicarrier out to get me. But it's kind of a weird plan. Actually, it's kind of like Thanos' plan. Take out a whole bunch of people.
No.
Not related?
No, totally different.
Oh, okay. I understand.
Much less snapping involved in Hydra's plan.
That is true. And for that point, Hydra, it's good to see a Hydra film as well, because that is Captain America back in the day, and then he gets to the present day and it's whatever. It's Loki and the Chitauri, but then you get to see, okay, well, he does have to still fight with his original enemy. But very good movie all around.
Absolutely. I'll talk about that later on, obviously. But number 6, I have Guardians of the Galaxy.
That's probably the biggest separation that we have on any two movies.
Probably so.
Because that's coming down from 15 for me. But for number 6, I have Black Panther.
Okay. We already talked about Guardians of the Galaxy a little bit, but I would just like to go on record and say that it is a fantastic MCU movie. It is a breath of fresh air, as we said. The soundtrack alone is fantastic. It was a bestseller soundtrack, even though the songs aren't original to this movie. That compilation of songs, in conjunction with what was happening on screen, was just phenomenal. The characters, I think, work very well in this first movie. You get to know each of them. You get to know Groot and Rocket and Star-Lord, and you get to see them in their own environments before they have to come together and work. There's another Infinity Stone in this movie, which, is the first time that we really, get to okay, so we're really ramping up this Infinity Stone arc. And because this was midway through phase 2 here. And so you get to see where things are going. And when it came out back in 2014, we didn't have Star Wars movies. Star Wars movies didn't start coming out until the next year, because it was on a break until Lucasfilm was bought, and they started with The Force Awakens in 2015. So to me, Guardians of the Galaxy was the best Star Wars movie I had seen in a long time. And I love Star Wars, so that was a fantastic, fantastic movie to me. And the comedy, I think, works much better than in the second one. I think they had a better idea of what they wanted everything to be. And even though Ronan in that movie, again, is a little underutilized and somewhat forgettable, I think that on the whole, the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie has an excellent balance of humor and action and heart. And so most people have it in their top 5 of the MCU, but I have it here at number 6.
All right. Well, I won't bother defending it. It's a great movie, as we've said with all of these. Even in the top 15 Marvel movies, that still makes it a great movie, and for you, top 6. So, for me, number 6 is Black Panther. I will do some fan service there, I suppose, since that is so beloved. But Black Panther, excellent movie, excellent action in the movie, a really interesting, completely different lore than we've seen in a whole lot of the other movies, because we've gotten mysticism with Doctor Strange, or we've gotten the magic of the gods with Thor, but now we get to see a lore that's entirely separate from that, and there are elements of other things, but it's very good by itself. To me also, and maybe this is just because I've read some of his novels, but it feels a lot like a Henry Rider Haggard story. Alan Quatermain, King Solomon's Mines. Because of the African setting, because of the vibranium mines, probably is the correlation that I'm making there. But it has a really interesting, more, I don't know if Indiana Jones feel would be appropriate for it, but there's something to it for me that's like that, and I enjoy it because of that. I enjoy the advanced technology that they have, even better than what the Avengers are using.
Yeah.
It's really neat to see that they are that much more advanced. I like his suit. I like the fighting that takes place. It's just good. Just everything about it. So
I can't argue with that. I know I had it lower, but yeah, it's a great movie. So now we reach into the top 5 MCU movies to this point. For number 5, I have Captain America Civil War.
okay. For me, number 5, I have Captain Marvel.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll talk about Civil War first, I guess.
Well, let me make this comment. Honestly, in the top 5, you could almost say in no particular order because
True.
they're just too good. It doesn't matter if they're number 5 or number 1. They're excellent, top tier movies out of any movies, not just Marvel.
Very true. Which is why I have Civil War up there, because I think it deserves a little more credit than you're giving it. I know you didn't dislike the film at all, but I think it is extremely, extremely well done. I mean, the Civil War arc in the comics was a very complicated issue, and the fact that they could even come close to pulling it off, which I think they did pull it off in this movie, is just a fantastic feat of cinematic wizardry. And the fact that they made Spider-Man in this movie without having officially, gotten a deal with Sony. The directors insisted, no, Spider-Man is necessary for this movie. And so that they were able to reach a conclusion, and so now Spider-Man is in the MCU because of this movie. That alone, and the fact that you were just talking about Black Panther, he was introduced in Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we first saw T'Challa. And he was a great aspect of the movie there as well. And so I think people were primed for Black Panther because of Civil War and excited to see more about him. I think the sides aren't quite as arbitrary as you made it out to be. I mean, obviously Falcon and Bucky are going to side with Cap, and obviously Rhodey and Vision are going to side with Tony. And so you only have a couple of other little things going on there. But, I mean, the airport scene alone is like 20 solid minutes of just superhero slugfest, and it is amazing. And everyone's favorite scene in the movie, really. But also, you mentioned earlier about the Captain America trilogy not flowing, but I think this movie is connected to the other ones because the driving force of the conflict between the two sides is Bucky. He was set up, he was framed for bombing the UN, and Cap wants to, set him free and prove he's innocent, and Tony says no, he has to come in and answer for it because of the Accords and all that. And then when you get to the climax of the movie, it comes down to Tony versus Cap over Bucky. They go to Siberia, all three of them, and then they fight it out there just amongst themselves. And we're used to big, like I said, CGI armies and everything, but a movie of this scale coming down to a personal one-on-one fist fight is something that we haven't seen before and maybe won't see again. So I think that Civil War is easily a top 5 Marvel movie, and many people will agree and call it Avengers 2.5 because it is basically another Avengers movie.
Mm-hmm.
And we just get to see small interactions like that with Vision and Scarlet Witch just, hanging out, making food or whatever, or them around a conference table talking. I mean, we get to see the Avengers being the Avengers. And I will say it does have lasting consequences, unlike what you said earlier, because the team is fractured. It's broken up. Half of them are out on the run now. And yes, they're coming back in Endgame, but had, the universe not been destroyed, who knows how long it would have taken.
Mm-hmm. I'll make the comment with Civil War that the second fight that happened, the first fight is over Bucky. The second fight's over Bucky, but it's more personal, of course, because it's you killed my parents. prepare to die, that kind of thing.
Right, which to me makes it even better.
Right. And then, of course, to me, probably the best line in the movie comes when Tony asks Bucky if he remembers them, and he informs Tony that he remembers all of them.
Yes.
Very powerful.
Very hard-hitting line. I would have said the best line in the movie is, "Hey, you remember that really old movie, Empire Strikes Back?" But
best comedic line, sure.
Yeah, different kinds of best lines there. So, what about Captain Marvel?
Captain Marvel. Maybe it's because I've seen it so recently. Maybe that has an influence on it. But excellent movie. I did love it being a period piece, especially because it wasn't a... When I think period piece, I usually think some war that happened a long time ago, or maybe the 1800s or something like that. But a period piece in the fairly recent past. But
within
also,
our lifetime.
Right. But it's not just a period piece on Earth. That part's cool, but it's also not exactly a period piece, but it's set in space too. And we get to see parts of space that we've never seen before. And honestly, it's maybe the parts that are in space might be even more grand than what we see in Guardians as far as space goes. Certainly more than we see in Thor, because you've got these two rival planets, peoples that are facing each other, and then you have Captain Marvel stuck right in the middle of that. I thought that it was very well carried out, the whole storyline. We had this discussion before, but it made it seem as if the Skrull were kind of buddy-buddy, and they were your best friends. That's one problem I do have with it.
That's true. That's why I had it at number 10, which is still a good spot.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy this movie as well, but to me, the Skrulls were a little too sympathetic if they ever do decide to implement the Secret Invasion story arc, where people have been replaced with Skrulls for years on end. Because then you'll just sit back and be like, wait, weren't they like really nice people? And so, yeah, it's a little conflicting in that regard, but who's to say that that's their plan anyway?
Right. Which, if that is their plan, spoilers. So, with the movie, though, excellent, and the after credits scene ties in perfectly. Like we said, makes you ready to see Endgame. As soon as you leave the theater, you think, okay, well, what time is it showing? You know, is it the next show? Can I go to it? Because it's perfect. It's perfect as far as that goes. And really enjoyed her character, Carol's character. Thought it was very well portrayed. And just, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything bad that I can say about it, except maybe the way that we see the Skrull portrayed.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to see more from her in Endgame, but also just in general.
Absolutely.
In MCU. So for number 4, I have Avengers Infinity War.
Okay, that's a lot higher than mine. For me, number 4 is the original Iron Man.
Okay, I can see that. I'll talk about Infinity War first, I guess. Easily top 5 movie to me. I didn't say this about Civil War, but Civil War, my last pick, really is the first time that you cannot see this movie blind. You cannot go into Civil War and have not seen every other movie before, because you'll have no clue what's going on. And that is doubly true for Infinity War. If you haven't seen every Marvel movie up until this date, if you didn't see Doctor Strange because you didn't think it looked that good, you're out of luck. If you didn't see the Guardians movies, you'll have no clue what's going on. I mean, you'll pick up on parts like, oh, yeah, that's Iron Man, I know him. But you need to watch everything. But for a guy like me that's watched everything, this movie is catnip. I mean, this has everything that I want. This has people meeting that have never met before, and people going places that they've never been. The Avengers go to Wakanda. We just saw Wakanda in Black Panther, and now they're there. And they have a huge battle, and it's amazing. Banner is in the Hulkbuster armor, the thing that's used to fight him. I mean, sure, Thor's arc with Rocket and Groot is a little, not as good, maybe, but then it makes up for that completely when Thor shows up in Wakanda through the Bifrost and says, "Bring me Thanos," and kills about 100 guys in one blow.
Oh, that's a low estimate.
Yes, exactly. And then you have all the stuff on Titan with Tony's group and the Guardians, and all that. And Doctor Strange's fight with Thanos, you were talking about action. That alone is phenomenal. That is a beautiful fight. And then Thanos using all of the different stones at different times, and you can tell which one he's using. But then, the very end of it, when he shows up, he's got all 5 of the other stones, and he shows up in Wakanda too, and everyone's trying to get to him, and then they can't, but Scarlet Witch is holding him off with one hand and killing Vision, the love of her life, with the other. It's such a powerful moment, and then Thanos is like, yeah, that stinks. Time! And unkills Vision, and then takes the Mind Stone and snaps everyone out of existence. And then there's so many powerful deaths, if you want to call them that, or dustings or whatever, in that moment. But to me, the one with Spider-Man is hit the hardest to me, where he's just this kid and he says, everyone's vanishing away, and then he says, I don't feel so good. And then you're like, oh no, not him too. And then he just says that he doesn't want to go, and that he's scared and doesn't know what's happening. And then he says that he's sorry. I mean, yes, it feels like you attended a funeral, but man, I mean, the same thing could be said about Empire Strikes Back, and that's everyone's favorite Star Wars movie, pretty much. I mean,
that
hands
really old
down.
movie?
Yeah, that really old movie, Empire
Yeah.
Strikes Back. Most people, that's their favorite Star Wars movie, and it has that gut punch, just like Infinity War. So to me, that's not a bad thing.
We've talked about that before, about the scene with Peter, but honestly, it is the exact same as, to me anyway, as in Harry Potter, to cross some more streams there. But you've got, oh man, Dumbledore died. That stinks. Oh, Snape died. Well, that's really sad. But Dobby?
Yeah.
Not Dobby.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's not Spider-Man. I mean, anybody but Spider-Man. So, yeah, it has that same effect. Even watching it in the theater for the first time, the crowd's reactions, especially then, were, oh man, that's rough.
So the first Iron Man.
First Iron Man. It is a good movie. It's a standalone movie, as was said previously, because it had to be. And part of the reason it ranks so high, and this isn't really in the criteria, but for this movie, it has its own criterion, which is, without it, there would not be an MCU. Nothing else would have come. And that's not just true if they hadn't made it. That's true if it hadn't have done well. If it had have been, oh, well, that was okay, then nobody would have kept going to see the other ones, or they wouldn't have made any more. So for that by itself, it's an important thing. I also think, even still to date, it's the best origin story. It is dated, but it is an excellent origin story of Iron Man, and it does a good job taking him from a hateable jerk to a lovable jerk by the end of the movie. I think it does a great job with that. Also, the robot arm is probably the funniest character in the first phase of the MCU.
I can't argue with that. It is definitely the funniest character without any dialogue, for sure.
Yes, which I don't know how many characters there are without dialogue, but it's top tier there.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. The first Iron Man is great. A lot of people say it's their number one favorite still to this day, and I can definitely see why. So, number 3?
Number 3.
We're in the top 3 now. And for me, my number 3 is Captain America, the First Avenger.
Okay. For people who don't remember the subtitle, it's just the first one.
Yeah, that's the first Captain America movie, in case you haven't seen it in a while.
Right. Wasn't that the name of it in Russia? Just the First Avenger?
Yeah, they didn't want Captain America on the poster, so it was just called the First Avenger in certain other countries.
Okay. So, my number 3 is Doctor Strange.
Okay,
Doctor Strange. What was that for you?
11.
11. So,
And
didn't make the top 10.
I didn't even dislike it.
Yeah. Well, I actively liked it, so.
Well, why don't you talk about it?
Okay. I did like it. It was, maybe for me, if I just said Iron Man was the best origin story, I think this is number 2. I think this does an excellent job at introducing the new character and taking him also from kind of a jerk in the beginning of the movie to a very sage, not much of a jerk by the end of the movie. And it does a good job progressing that character forward. It has a good balance of normal life, verisimilitude versus magic. And you get the kind of a medical drama toward the beginning, which also, let me say specifically, I appreciate that they didn't make it gory because they could have with everything that happened. But the worst thing you see are all the pins in his hands, which is still pretty bad. But it could have been a lot worse. But you get to see the medical drama side of it, and then you also get to see the mystical side of it. And they've got not that many side characters, but between Wong and his what's the name of the cape?
The Cloak of Levitation?
Yes. Between those two characters, you feel like you have a full cast of friends that are beside him. So, I just realized he's the second funniest character without any dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cloak of Levitation.
Well, maybe funniest in Phase 3.
Okay, fair enough. We'll have to pick one for Phase 2.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay. But Doctor Strange, very good. It was unexpected for me, but as soon as I came out of the theater for that, it was just a thought of, this is one of the best movies that I've seen in a long time, period. Not just Marvel, but in general.
Yeah, I mean, I had it lower numerically on the list, but in my heart, it isn't that far removed because I said a lot of good things about it, and I have to stand by everything you said as well. So, to me, Captain America, the First Avenger, was pretty much a game changer. When it came out, it was hands down my favorite superhero movie ever, which is, saying a lot because that title had just been taken earlier, a couple of months, by X-Men First Class. But then Captain America, the First Avenger came out, and I was like, oh, man, this is fantastic. Number one, I love period pieces as well. This one obviously set in World War II. And Cap's whole relationship with the war and everything, and all of his characters. Dr. Erskine was a beautiful character, very well done, very well portrayed. His death was very sad. I think the way they tied in Howard Stark was a genius stroke. I mean, it was very, very seamless the way that he was in there. Peggy Carter is by far my favorite quote-unquote love interest of any MCU film, and the fact that she got her own TV series that lasted 2 seasons says volumes about that as well. The fact that her funeral was a major plot point in Phase 3 means that she still has had long-lasting effects on the MCU, even though she's only really had one major movie to her credit. I think the Red Skull, he's not the most memorable of the MCU villains, but I think he did a good job. I think he is a good villain. He's probably one of the best of what you see as the mirror image of the hero. I mean, that's always a good villain. You saw that in Iron Man with Ironmonger, even though I don't think they did that as well. You saw that in Thor with Loki. They're mirror images of one another. But having the Red Skull have the serum and have it corrupt him instead of enhance him, like Steve did, was, it was a really pretty refreshing thing, and it's not easy to pull off all the time. Tommy Lee Jones, as the supporting general, not only commands authority, but is also hilarious. And you can't get that sort of thing. The Howling Commandos, they were all good in the story. They were funny when they needed to be. They were able to pull off operations with ease. And this is where his relationship with Bucky starts. I mean, you can't have any of the other ones if it weren't for this movie and what happens to Bucky in this movie, seemingly being killed by Dr. Zola, who is another good supporting character and also shows up again later. I mean, the things set up in this movie are fantastic, but a lot of people don't respect this movie the way that I do, and I honestly don't get that a lot. I mean, I can understand, like, a valid criticism I heard is, like, there's a montage in the middle of the movie where they're just, like, busting up bases, and that would have been cool to see. Yeah, I agree with that, but, I mean, we needed to have him fight the entirety of the war and then get to the modern day within the first movie. So what are you going to do? And in the end, the way he sacrifices himself, selflessness is, to me, the most admirable quality a person can have, and Captain America is all about selflessness. From the first time in training camp when he jumps on that grenade while everyone else runs away, to his actual sacrifice at the end. He didn't know he was coming back. He thought that was it. It's just luck that his super soldier serum helped him survive in the ice all those years. To me, as I said, this was my favorite superhero movie that I've ever seen at one point. And to only have two movies come over that since then is pretty impressive.
Agreed. I can't disagree because I still haven't listed it. So I've got some more comments to make if we want to roll into the next slot.
Okay, for number two,
Number two, mine would be Captain America,
the first Avenger.
the first Avenger.
All right, well, why don't you talk about it?
Okay, before you reveal your number two,
Okay,
yeah,
for my number two, I have the Avengers.
the Avengers. I don't even know what that leaves left for you.
Well,
I guess
you'll
we'll
find out.
Yeah, we'll find out in a minute. Okay, so for Captain America, the first Avenger, excellent film. I also enjoy a good period piece, especially set in one of the most interesting time periods in certainly American history and in a lot of other history. I think the Red Skull did a good job. I think he was not, like I said earlier, Ultron's probably the best one-off villain, but Red Skull did do a very good job as a one-off villain.
I forgot to mention, speaking of one-off villain, he's technically not anymore because he did come
Well,
back in Infinity War,
but he wasn't
which no
really,
one was expecting.
I did like that. I liked basically a cameo, but he wasn't really a villain. He was a tragic guardian.
Right, but when he was Tesseract away at the end of the first Avenger, which is another thing I totally forgot to mention, was their inclusion of the Tesseract and the way it was so seamlessly included, but also a reference to Thor and then the movie that came right after it too.
Right, and that could be said also for Captain Marvel that we mentioned before.
That's very true.
Another seamless tie-in of the Tesseract. You get to see it throughout various periods in history. It's kind of neat. So, also with Steve could have been really boring. He really could have been, because he's Johnny Do-Good, and that could have been just perfectly stale. And he could have just been, oh, well, let's all do the right thing. But it wasn't. And it's not that they made him bad or anything, but they made that endearing. They made him not just someone with integrity, but someone with selflessness that was ready to do things for anybody else. And favorite line from the film, I think it's my favorite line, at least comedic line from the film, is whenever they're breaking a group out of prison and they... Is it Dum Dum Dugan? Does he make the comment?
Yes.
He says, oh, so we're taking anyone. And then you have the dog tag held up and said, I'm from Fresno, Ace. It's just beautiful comedy, and there's not a whole lot of comedy in the movie, but where it's at, it's very well done. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of good things for it, and it might not age as well. Of course, it's first phase, so you have to keep that in mind, but it may not have even aged as well as some of the other first phase films, but it still has done a very good job. Excellent movie, obviously, if it's in number 2 spot.
Yeah, I can't disagree. Okay. For number 2, I have The Avengers, which, was also my favorite superhero movie ever at one point. And it's not that it's worse than the number 1 slot. It's just personal preference, but we'll get to that. Listen, you gotta remember, this had never been done. This was not a proven strategy. I mean, now everyone's trying to do a shared universe, and everyone's failing at it because of this movie. Marvel spent, 4 years building up to this from the very first post-credit scene in Iron Man. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative. That was just a throwaway thing for fans, and it was just a far-off dream to have this. No one had ever combined 3 or 4 separate movie franchises into one singular movie and have them all be coherent and part of the same story. And when you watch the movie, it is such a fun movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have to go and collect all the Avengers, and some people don't like the beginning. They say it's too slow. But I like the different introductions and getting to know everyone. Because if you only watched Iron Man movies before that, you would be confused. And so it works if you've never seen any of the others, but also it works if you've seen all of them. And so it's very, very funny. It is hilarious. Mm-hmm. I saw the midnight premiere of The Avengers, and then I saw it again at like 5 o'clock on Friday. I saw it twice within 24 hours, and I laughed maybe harder the second time. And there were jokes that I couldn't even hear until the fifth time I saw the movie because of the thunderous laughter in the theater. There's just so many jokes on top of each other that you can't hear them because people are laughing at the last one. But more than that, it also has them coming together as a team. There's so much fan service in this movie, and fan service gets a bad rap. It's not a bad term. It can be done poorly, and that's when it's bad. But fan service by itself is not bad. And so having a shot circle around all of the Avengers in one spot is complete fan service. There's no reason that needs to be in the movie, or that tracking shot of like 45 seconds where it follows everyone through the battle. They just put that in there because they know people love this sort of thing.
And it worked.
It worked. And we talked about how we wouldn't have the MCU if different things didn't work, like Iron Man and stuff. If this didn't work, that was it. There would have been nothing after this. If this would have made like half the money Iron Man did, they would have had to like shut down production. But instead, it made $1 billion because everyone was enamored with this concept and the way that they were able to pull it off so seamlessly. All of the different characters staying true to who they were, but also being able to interact with these people that we had seen in other movies and never thought that we would see on screen. I thought it was fantastic.
Agreed. Obviously agreed.
Well, that leaves your number one spot, which
That does leave my number one spot, which may or may not be. It is the Avengers. The
Right.
Avengers.
and you can talk about that as well after I say my number one slot, which is Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Right. I did figure that out before this point. Now.
Right.
I did deduct that from.
So
what
why
was
don't
left.
you wrap up with the Avengers?
Okay, so with the Avengers, of course it's a great movie. Everybody knows it's a great movie, but like you said, I mean, I guess it was expected to do well, but at the same time, it had never been done. So it could have just as easily, people had gone and seen it and then thought, well, that was weird, or that didn't really work, or that didn't flow, but it did. And it was perfect as far as that goes. The only thing, and I've said this already to this point, is the villain. The villain was not perfect. Could have been done better. And really, I mean, more so the CGI army of battle droids. Were they super battle droids? Or
They more resembled those, but no, they were Chitauri.
okay, not orcs?
No.
Okay, well, there was some kind of, faceless army that they got to fight. Anyway,
Which I will say at that point was okay, because that was the first Marvel movie to do that, really.
that's true.
Unless you count the hammer drones from Iron Man 2. But even then, there were only like, 2 dozen.
Right.
But they needed someone to fight. They couldn't all just be punching Loki in a circle, otherwise that wouldn't work. But I will say Loki by himself did work as a villain.
He did.
And what's even better is Loki was the original villain that created the Avengers in the comics. He was the one threat that they united to fight. And so doing that again in the movie was beautiful.
Right, and it was very well done, and it felt very high stakes at the time of watching it. It really seemed like, okay, well, everything's going to end if they don't stop this portal with all of these Chitauri flowing out of it. So it worked really well for that. The shot of the circle shot, the best known, I guess, of the movie, right in front of Grand Central Station, is excellent, of course. The camera work's wonderful. And then the 45-second shot of going through building and seeing all that, again, fantastic. But I think my favorite scene in the movie is actually when they're back at the base and they are arguing. The entire room arguing at one time, all having separate arguments about very real, believable things that they would disagree on. And it makes perfect sense, and it shows that even though they are the Avengers, the team that's supposed to protect the Earth, they still have their own problems that they are working out. And of course, those problems resurface in Civil War, but
Among other places.
But it worked absolutely beautifully there, and it was the perfect first wrap-up of the MCU. It's exactly what was needed, and obviously hopeful that Endgame does the same with the point that we're at now in the MCU, but it fulfilled its role perfectly. It was enjoyable, and it was and still is one of the greatest movies that I have seen.
Absolutely. It will go down in history as a landmark in cinema because of what it was able to achieve. I mean, it broke every record at the time of like opening weekend and all that sort of thing. And we would be remiss if we did not mention Agent Coulson and his importance up until that point and being the thing for which they are avenging. I mean, the movie starts where he goes and talks to Tony, and he and Pepper have an exchange, and Tony's like, you know his first name? His first name is Agent. And then later on, Tony's talking to Loki, and he says, yeah, and there's one more person. His name was Phil. Saying his name and giving him the respect that he deserves as an Avenger.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, talking about giving him the respect he deserves, he got a TV show on ABC called Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, I do kind of wish that they would include him back into a modern day movie and let them know that he's not been dead for 6 years. But, you know.
Maybe they'll get around to that.
I hope so. We were talking about fan service, and so, like, that would be a very fan servicey thing for them
absolutely.
to do. And I'm sure they know that. But, okay, my number one slot is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And I know that you had it much lower.
7?
Yes. But I think that this is pretty near a perfect movie. Not just a perfect Marvel movie, but almost a perfect film. And it works as a standalone movie completely. You don't have to have seen the first Avenger. And judging by the box office, many people that saw Winter Soldier did not see the first Avenger because it made almost twice as much.
Mm-hmm.
However, you mentioned before also about the Captain America movies not flowing, but I think they do because of the relationship between him and Bucky. And that is the crux of what this movie is all about. You have Bucky, who's alive, and Steve had no idea, and then he finds out that he's not only alive, but also like an evil assassin,
mm-hmm.
and he has to fight him. And we didn't mention earlier Falcon, but him being introduced in this movie, and he was used just the right amount, I think. They didn't like overuse him, but he's not a background player at all. Like
mm-hmm.
he is here for the movie, almost as much as Black Widow is. And so I think they developed Falcon really well in his first movie, and that's why he's been able to, hold his own in the subsequent entries in the series. And as you said, Black Widow is a fantastic addition to this movie. I think using her in this way was good because she was introduced in Iron Man 2, and then she was in the Avengers, but then, she hasn't had her own standalone movie yet. But putting her here in this one helped to remind people that she exists, number one, but also, two, to, develop her character. Because in this, she and Steve develop a real trust for each other, even though she's a dubious spy that assassinates people. And he's, quote-unquote, a Boy Scout.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, Captain America could be boring because he just does the right thing all the time. And while I agree that he wasn't boring in the first Avenger, not everyone feels that way, and this movie made people turn around on him. They made people say, oh, yeah, Captain America's really cool. Not only, number one, is the fight choreography in this movie ratcheted up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just watch that first scene on the boat where he's taking out guys left and right,
yeah.
and then fights the kicking guy, Batroc the Leaper. But, I mean, that is fantastic stuff.
Or the elevator scene.
Or the elevator scene that they showed in the trailers.
Mm-hmm.
Or his fight with Bucky under the bridge where, he's got the knife and everything. And, I mean, the choreography you could just watch all day long. But, as I was saying, he does the right thing in this movie, in the modern day. It shows that doing the right thing isn't some outdated concept from yesterday that we can't hold on to anymore. He is still Steve Rogers. He's still the same weakling that got the serum, but always has a heart of gold. He does the right thing, even in the modern day, even when it's hard. He shuts down S.H.I.E.L.D. because Hydra has been working within it. Now, we mentioned Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. earlier, and Winter Soldier gave it a really cool pivot point if you watch that series. So that's another just thing that you can praise this movie for.
Mm.
But my favorite thing about this movie, probably, I mentioned before about Cap's selflessness and how I admire that. When the threat comes with the helicarriers, he fights Bucky tooth and nail. He fights him so hard to get all the helicarriers to change their targets or whatever. And then once they finally get the lock and switch over the targets, that no one's in danger anymore, he stops fighting. When there's lives on the line, he fights to the end. But once everyone's safe, he's not going to fight his friend anymore. Because that is my best friend and I don't want to hurt him. And then he says, I'm with you to the end of the line. And then he gets thrown from the helicarrier and Bucky saves him out of the water. And there's just so many beautiful things like that in the movie. Robert Redford, we didn't even talk about, but he's a great Hydra head in that movie. And, you know, Nick Fury's utilized well in the movie as well. He has that cool car chase scene. They made a car chase cool in Phase 2 after we've seen aliens come and invade the Earth. And you're just sitting here like, yeah, cars. You can get that in any movie, but the Winter Soldier made it cool.
Right.
So to me, it has all the best aspects of the last two entries that I said, First Avenger and the Avengers. And it merges them together in what I think is not only a great MCU film, but a near-perfect film in its own right. And so that is why I put it at number 1 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Are you looking for comment on that movie?
I just want to see if I'm wrong.
Oh, I don't think you're wrong. No, and the scene. I think the reason that scene is so touching between Bucky and Steve, obviously, is because they've set it up for years, and because the comics had set it up for years before that. But it's the same scene that we see in two places actually in Star Wars, both in the Revenge of the Sith, when Obi-Wan reluctantly fights his friend for the first time then, and then the second time when it's kind of the same thing, when lives aren't necessarily on the line, when he's not trying to stop him and he recognizes that Luke is going to take up his mantle afterwards. He says, no, I'm not going to fight you anymore, so I'll turn off my lightsaber and do the sacrificial thing. And certainly that story, anytime it's told, is always powerful. And actually, this might be an obscure reference, but R.S. Stevenson, Robert Louis Stevenson book Kidnapped. Same thing happens in that, where two friends have to fight each other, and one just says, "I won't." And it's every time you see that, it's powerful. I think that wraps up that movie very well. It was number 7 for me, but it easily could have been higher. Just depends on the day that I ranked them. So it certainly is an excellent movie. Anything in the top 5 is some of the best quality film that's ever been made, and certainly that's the case for all of these.
Yeah, that is very, very true. Pretty much every day that I've looked at this, something on the list has changed. This list, it'll probably be different tomorrow, but who cares about that because we did it today.
Right.
So that is the ranking for every current MCU movie to date. What did you think? What are your ranks? Do let us know down in the comments. Also, what do you think of Avengers Endgame? Did it live up to the hype? I would be shocked if it's a letdown. But
likewise.
I will be very much looking forward to it. And also, I expect a flood of information to come out after Endgame. They've been very hush-hush about things up until this point, worrying about spoilers, I imagine. But after the movie, I assume that we'll get names and dates for all sorts of fantastic movies to come.
Maybe Inhumans.
Well, that's a story for another time.
All right.
Thanks for watching.